My husband kicked me out of my own apartment and emptied my bank account. "We can't let you in," the building manager said. "It belongs to your husband now." I thought I understood what happened, but then I found out this. My husband was begging me for forgiveness. I was sure I'd gotten off on the wrong floor. Seriously, I was standing in the hallway of my Chicago condo with my suitcase after a business trip, staring at the door and thinking, "Liz, you're just exhausted. Go up one more floor and everything will make sense." Only one floor up there was no doormat with a pineapple and the word welcome-ish. It was right where it always was, at my door. At the door, my key suddenly didn't fit. I tried again, slowly, carefully, like the lock was offended and I needed to talk it into cooperating. Nothing. I called Eric. Once, twice, 3 times. Voicemail. I texted, "Eric, did you change the lock? I'm standing at the door. What's going on?" 2 gray check marks and silence. At some point, a guy in pajama shorts with a dog poked his head out of the neighboring apartment. "Everything okay?" "Yeah, it's just that my husband apparently—" I nodded at the door. "Changed the lock and forgot to tell me." He gave me the look people give someone who hasn't realized they're getting dumped yet. "Good luck," he said, and shut his door. Thanks, neighbor. Huge help. 10 minutes later, I was sitting in the building management office downstairs, suitcase at my feet, and the same expression people wear at the bank when the teller says, "So, your account is actually empty." "Mrs.?" The manager glanced at his screen. "Mrs. Gray?" "Miss, but whatever. Yeah." "Okay, look." He turned the monitor toward me. "The owner of the unit is Eric Gray. Just him." He said it casually, like he wasn't explaining that apparently I lived in my husband's condo, not the other way around. "How is it just him?" I asked. "I bought that condo before we got married, with my money." He shrugged. "There's a quitclaim deed in the file. You signed over your interest 6 months ago." My face went hot. 6 months ago. Right when Eric had been pushing me to move the title into my name so the bank will do the business loan with the condo as collateral. "Liz, it's just paperwork. Don't you trust me?" Of course I trusted him. I was a smart woman with a degree, a good job, and a functioning brain. Smart enough to sign documents without reading them because the lawyer's handling it. "We can't let you into the unit," the manager went on, a little gentler now. "Legally, this is a domestic dispute. Without the owner's approval, no can do." Yeah, domestic dispute. Where one party is inside with my stuff and the other is standing there with a suitcase and the news that the condo apparently never really belonged to her. I called Eric again. Voicemail. Then I called the one person he was more afraid of than the IRS and the FBI combined. His mother. Helen opened the door so fast, it was like she'd been standing right behind it waiting. "Liz?" She looked at me, at the suitcase, and her mouth trembled. "What happened?" I tried to smile. "Looks like your son just unilaterally divorced me without notifying the other party." She stepped aside to let me in. "Come in, take your coat off. You can tell me later, if you even want to." Helen's house always smelled like coffee and something cinnamon adjacent. In theory, that should be comforting. In practice, I was shaking. I dumped everything out on her. The condo, the lock, the manager, the quitclaim deed, Eric's dead phone. Somewhere in the middle, she sat down across from me and covered her face with her hands. "He finally went there," she said. "Damn his father." I knew about the father, sort of. The for the daughter-in-law version. In that version, Michael Gray was a charming businessman who got a little too creative with risky investments and maybe pushed it with the accounting. Then came federal agents, an investigation, a trial, big headlines, seizure of everything that wasn't bolted down, and Helen with teenage Eric moving into a tiny house on the edge of town and learning how to live without restaurants and boats. I thought, she looked at me with red eyes, that he hated what his father did. I thought so too. It's easier to love a man who condemns something than one who quietly admires it. I'm going to file for divorce, I said, and I'll find a way to get the condo back. Helen sighed. Tomorrow morning we'll find a lawyer, she said. Today you're just sleeping here. You are not going to be alone, you hear me? And just like that, in one evening, I lost my home, my husband, and the illusion that I controlled my life. In exchange, I got a mother-in-law who very seriously offered me her old pajama pants with teddy bears on them. The lawyer was a kind, balding man in his 50s who looked at me the way a vet looks at a kitten that got clipped by a car but somehow survived. Let's start with the bad news, he said, flipping through the folder. You signed the quitclaim deed voluntarily. There's no sign of overt pressure in the paperwork. Legally, you gifted your interest in the condo to your husband. I nodded. Great. I was generous on top of everything. Joint accounts? He asked. My paycheck went into a shared account, but it was in his name, I muttered. It was just easier. He handled the bills. He typed something into his system and turned the screen toward me. That account is at 0. Everything was withdrawn in cash in a few transactions. I stared at the 0.00 and thought I had never seen a 0 look so offensive. Can we get anything back? I asked. He sighed. In theory, we could try to have the condo transfer voided as fraud. Argue that he misled you. That's a long, expensive fight. As for the money, he hesitated. You voluntarily transferred it into an account solely in his name. On paper, those are gifts or marital expenses. He paused, then added, the good news is that you'll still have rights in the divorce, but the condo, odds are very slim. Good news. Somewhere inside, a hysterical laugh flickered. I filed for divorce the same day. Adrenaline kept me upright for about a week. Then it wore off. Eric stayed silent. His phone stayed in voicemail-only mode. His social media was as empty as his bank account. His office was closed for renovations. Mutual friends shrugged. We thought you two went away together. It was like he'd evaporated. But I had Helen. If you'd told me a year earlier that after my husband disappeared, I'd be living with his mother, I'd have smiled politely and moved away from you. But Helen and I turned out to be weirdly in sync. I worked, came back to her small house where she put dinner on the table and apologized for boring food. I dropped 2 sizes from stress. She did it on sheer stubbornness and pacing the house. By the 3rd time she called herself an old woman, I'd had enough. You're not an old woman, I told her. You're someone who had a con man husband, an idiot son, and way too much free time. Let's fix at least one of those problems. That's how Helen became an assistant at my company. Yes, I took my mother-in-law to work. Yes, it turned out to be the best HR decision of my life. She sat at the front desk, greeted clients, learned every delivery driver's name, and within a week was quietly managing half the office. You do realize, our HR guy whispered to me, that if Helen ever wants to stage a coup, we're all following her? I just smirked. Honestly, better her running this circus than someone like my missing husband. Somewhere in this new rhythm of office coffee, snowy Chicago commutes, and nights watching shows in Helen's living room, there was Dave. Dave had worked with me for 2 years, senior analyst, the guy who could explain complicated numbers with crayons and somehow never sounded condescending. When Eric vanished, Dave was one of the few people who didn't either blame me or treat me like I was the next episode of a true crime podcast. He just set a coffee on my desk one day and said, I don't know what you've got going on. If you need someone to drive you to a lawyer, I can be that guy. or I can just stand there and pretend I'm your scary older brother." We laughed. I refused. But from that day, the coffee kept showing up. A couple months later, he asked, "There's a photo exhibit on Saturday. I accidentally bought 2 tickets. Want to help me not look like the weird guy who showed up alone?" Accidentally? I said yes. At the exhibit, I caught myself laughing for the first time in a long while. Not the bitter, sarcastic kind, but genuine. Dave was different. Steady. Solid. The kind of man who didn't hide his phone when I walked into the room or put on a mysterious face every time it buzzed. "You know you're still married, right?" Helen asked one day when I came home from yet another coffee with Dave. "I know," I said. "I also know there's a man walking around out there who stole my condo and my savings. So let's just say I'm legally married and emotionally very much not." Helen snorted. "Fine, just don't let him pay for everything. Let at least one woman in this story not be sponsoring a man." Helen wasn't exactly sitting out the romance game herself. In her case, not sitting out looked like George. A neighbor dragged her to the local community center for a veterans program. That's where she met a tall, silver-haired man with straight posture and the eyes of someone who'd read way too many reports. "He used to be an officer," she confessed to me like she was admitting a crime. "Some federal agency, retired." "Like FBI?" I asked. "I don't ask," she said briskly. "It's enough for me that he's polite to waiters." What they had was calm. He picked her up from work, brought flowers for no reason, listened to her stories about being married to Michael and pulling herself and her son out of the wreckage after his arrest. "His younger colleagues still call him sometimes," she told me. "For advice. His brain's still working." I was just glad. If federal agents are calling somebody for guidance, odds are that person isn't currently committing crimes. That was all I needed just then. 8 months after that night at the door, I got a letter in the mail. Cook County Circuit Court. Final judgment of dissolution of marriage. I stood in the kitchen, looking at the official stamp and thinking that instead of a stamp in my passport, I now had an 8-page document stating I was officially no longer Mrs. Gray. Helen silently pulled out her good wine glass. "What are we drinking to?" she asked. "To no longer being married to a man who changed the lock and turned off his phone," I said, "and to being dumb enough to still hope I can get my condo back." We clinked glasses. The wine was cheap. It tasted like my self-esteem at the time. The end of this story started, ironically, with an invitation to dinner. "I want to take the 2 of you out to a restaurant," George said one day when he came to pick up Helen from work. "We'll make it a little celebration. You, Helen, Liz, Dave, me, and one more person." "Okay." Helen narrowed her eyes. "You're not trying to set Liz up on a blind date, are you?" "Not exactly," he said. "But I'd appreciate it if you both don't run out in the first 5 minutes." Not the most reassuring pitch, but I agreed. Maybe I was just tired of living permanently in waiting for bad news mode and wanted to see if there was yet another level. The restaurant was downtown. White tablecloths. The kind that instantly make me start calculating what this is going to cost. Outside, Chicago was pretending it knew what spring was. We were 4 at the table. Me, Dave, Helen, and George. The 5th chair was empty. "He's late," I tried to joke. "So it's definitely not the IRS." "Liz," Helen said quietly, staring over my shoulder. "Don't turn around." Naturally, I turned around immediately. The 5th guest was not the IRS. The 5th guest was my ex-husband. Eric stood by the entrance looking pretty much like I remembered him, just older, minus 8 months of expensive grooming, plus however many of sleepless nights. Same suit, same eyes, just none of that easy, the world is in my pocket confidence. My hands went cold. "I'm leaving," I said, grabbing my purse. George lifted a hand. Liz, please, give him 10 minutes. Then you can go if you want. Are you serious? I stared at him. You brought the guy who stole my home and my money, and you're asking me to give him 10 minutes? I know how it sounds, he said calmly. I also know the entire case file on him. I froze. Eric reached the table. Helen looked at him like she was trying to hug him and slap him at the same time. Dave's jaw clenched. He politely lowered his eyes to the menu. Eric stopped at my side. Hi, Liz, he said, voice rough. Thanks for coming. I came for them, I said. Not for you. He nodded, sat in the 5th chair, and spent a moment just shredding his napkin like he'd forgotten how to talk to people. I didn't just disappear, he finally said. They picked me up. Congratulations, I said. Sorry I wasn't there to clap. The corner of George's mouth twitched. He approved of that one. Remember when you asked what I actually did with those investors? Eric went on. I remembered. I'd asked. He always answered with something like, it's boring finance stuff. You'd hate it. A couple years ago, one of the partners turned out to be an old friend of my dad's, he said. Same scams, 21st century version. Funds, shell companies, retirees putting their pensions into air. I looked at him and felt everything inside me going numb again, like I was being driven back to that lock that wouldn't turn. At some point, federal agents came to see me, he said. They already knew everything. About my dad, about the accounts, about the calls. They told me I had 2 options. Go down with everyone else or cooperate. And you chose option 3, I said. Rob your wife first, then cooperate. His jaw tightened. I agreed to work under their supervision, he said. To get deeper into the scheme, they needed someone on the inside. I was perfect. Michael Gray's son, with access to the right people. I felt sick. They didn't tell me, take your wife's condo, he said quickly. That was my idea. Fantastic, I said. That makes it so much better. For these people, family is a weakness, he said, words rushing out like he was afraid I'd stand up and walk. They needed to see I was willing to put everything on the line. The condo, the money, all those transfers, cash withdrawals. They were part of the cover. I had to look like one of them. He met my eyes. And yeah, I knew I was hurting you. I told myself I'd explain it all later, when it was over. Convenient, Helen muttered. Destroy your wife first, then explain. You get that line from your father, too? Eric flinched like she'd slapped him. The operation ended last month, George finally cut in. They were arrested. Several of them have already taken deals. Michael Gray is getting his 2nd sentence. And Liz, he looked at me. You were listed as a victim in the case. I stared at him. And what does that mean, besides a nice word? It means, George said evenly, that the court is going to void the condo transfer as done under fraudulent circumstances. The condo comes back to you. As for the money, the prosecutor included it in restitution. It'll take time, but your savings will be repaid, at least partially. I looked from him to Eric and back. So this whole time, I said slowly, I've been living with your mother, thinking I was a complete idiot who signed a gift receipt for my own life, and you were playing spy games? I wasn't playing, he said quietly. I was working with them. Every day I woke up knowing I might not come back, that I could get burned, and every day I told myself I was doing it to fix things. And how do you think the fixing went? I asked. He swallowed. Badly, he admitted. For you, terribly. For Mom, too. I'm not asking you to take me back. He almost choked on the word I came to ask for forgiveness. for the condo, the bank, for leaving you on that landing with a suitcase. We sat in silence for a long time. Even the server was afraid to approach. And you? I turned to George. You knew all this and still thought a surprise family dinner was the move? I knew the investigation, he said, and I've watched how you and Helen live these last months. I couldn't tell you the details. That's not my place. But I could get you in the same room with them, both of you. Helen exhaled slowly. You're still going to prison? She asked her son. Yes, he said. The plea deal is basically done. It'll be less time than it could have been, but enough to think. She nodded. Honestly? She said. That's the only part of this that sounds fair. Something in me shifted. It didn't collapse or magically heal. It just clicked, like the sound of a lock finally turning. I don't know if I can forgive you, I told Eric, and I definitely don't know if I'll ever be able to trust you. I get that, he said softly. But I do know this, I went on. That night at the door, I thought I was a complete idiot, that I'd handed you the keys to my life and somehow missed the moment you slammed the door. Now I see, yeah, I was naive, but there were a couple of full-grown men in this story who could have designed an operation without turning a wife and a mother into collateral damage. George took that one on the chin, too. I'm sorry, Eric said. Really? And I'm sorry it took federal agents for you to figure that out, I answered. We never really got around to eating that dinner. At some point, I just stood up. I need to go home, I told Helen. Home. Her home, not mine. Yet. We walked out together. The night was cool. Chicago finally remembered it's the Windy City. Helen pulled out a cigarette, looked at it, and put it back. I thought I'd want to smoke, she said. Guess not. Progress, I said. We walked a couple blocks in silence. Did you forgive him? She asked suddenly. I thought about it. You know, I said, I think I did. Somewhere deep down, for my own sake. So I don't have to carry all this crap inside. Are you going back to him? No, I said, without hesitation. I can forgive someone. That doesn't mean I have to be his wife again. Helen nodded. I feel like that's very American, she said. You forgave him and filed for divorce. We both laughed, tired but real. A few months later, the court officially voided the condo transfer as fraudulent. The place came back to me. I stood in that same hallway where I'd once stood with my suitcase. Only now I had new keys and a new doormat. No pineapple, just home. I sold the condo a couple months later. Not because anything was wrong with it. It just echoed too loudly. Dave and I rented another place closer to the park. Helen and George came over for dinner sometimes, bringing wine and news. Michael had his new sentence, Eric had his, Helen had a new haircut. Sometimes I think about that first night, about the door that wouldn't open. Back then, it felt like the end of everything. Turns out, it was just the moment someone changed the lock, and I finally decided that next time, the only person holding the keys would be me. So yeah, my ex-husband stole my condo and my savings, turned out to be an informant in a federal operation, ended up giving everything back through the courts, and still went to prison. I forgave him. I didn't go back. Sometimes I wonder, was I too harsh? Or just harsh enough? Thanks so much for watching and spending this time with me. If this story made you feel anything, anger, relief, satisfaction, let me know in the comments. I really love reading your thoughts. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next story. Take care of yourselves and your loved ones. And I'll see you in the next video.